Welcome to Marathon Meeples Top 50 Replayable Games. This is going to be 40 to 31. Number 40 is Wingspan. So this game is replayable because there's just a ridiculous number of cards, different eggs. Even though the player boards stay the same and the overall gameplay stays the same, I think that the variety in the box, along with all of the other expansions that they have put out for this game. We love the Asia expansion, especially if you play 2 players. We think that that just adds an enormous amount of replayability to the game. Mind you, it also can be a standalone.
Yeah, I find with the cards, you're never going to say, okay, I always want this one type of card, because you're never going to get to it. So I think the birds in and of itself, even if you're trying to run the same general strategy, how you're going to get there is always going to be different based on the kind of cards you draw and what you're going to draft.
And what goal is coming up that round.
Yeah. Number 39 is Genotype, probably a surprise to a lot of people. This is a dice drafting game where you're basically just trying to match up dice of a certain type to make a certain plant. You're also going to have workers along the way that are going to help you, but I find that dice drafting and just that mechanic in and of itself is going to make the game a little bit different every time you play it.
And also, the different type of helper codes that you get or what's available is going to definitely change it up, especially if the other person drafts what you want. 38 is the pandemic system. So this is the Star Wars version, but it's the system itself, the fact that it's a co-op and it sets up nice and quick, it's going to play different every time based on the gamers you're playing with and the way the codes come out and where you have to move to in order to cure or battle around the board.
Yeah, you never know what fire you're going to have to put out in any pandemic. I think that right there makes it pretty replayable. Number 37 is City of the Great Machine. This game is essentially 2 games in one box, and I think that helps with the replayability because both versions are really good. The first version is a one versus many, where one person is the evil Great Machine, and the other person or persons are the heroes. And then there is a co-op / solo mode. They're basically the same thing where you're going up against an AI deck that plays the Great Machine. The game itself, you're always moving around, you're trying to find different people to recruit to your cause, and I think some of the cards that come in here as well help dictate some of your actions and change it up every time you play.
And what I love is the fact that it's a modular board. So some of those codes Matthias was talking about actually allow you to move portions of the board to a different area and saves you a lot of moving, but it changes the game because all of a sudden your board's different. Coming in at 36 is BOGO Bros. I love it. The box is part of the game. It is a co-op game where you are exploring different levels and having a night guard chase you while you try to rob the place. So you're trying to find safes. There's so many different moving pieces in this game. Not only do you set it up differently, put walls in different places, but the way that you interact with the guards, if another player is on the same floor as you or on a different floor, all of that changes how the game is played. And at the end of the day, even though you're doing the same thing, I find the game totally changes and it's easy to teach to somebody new.
Yeah, I think the one thing, I don't know if it's actually an official website or if it was a fan-made website, but there's a place you can go to online where it just randomizes that map. That, to me, really takes it from like somewhat replayable to very replayable. Number 35 is Renegade. I just got this back in, thus the Shrink. Renegade is very much like a Mage Knight style game for anybody that knows Mage Knight. You're setting up a board. In this, you're a group of hackers that are trying to like stop evil viruses from expanding out. Kind of has a little bit of a pandemic feel where you're trying to just put out fires. But in this game, every round, and you have 3 main rounds, you're just basically trying to put out a different fire and score a bunch of different victory points while you're doing it. So it always changes up. There's a ton of different characters with unique powers, and every game plays differently. I've played this like 40 times solo. I haven't taught this to you at all. I feel like this is going to get a reprint. I'm not 100% sure when. I think we're like 2-3 years on waiting for it. They may re-theme this to something that's maybe a little more market friendly, but whatever this system is, it's definitely going to be replayable in the future.
Coming in at 34 is the Dominant Species system. This is Dominant Species Marine. I love the game. Right in the box, you can play one character, and then there's another option where if you're playing at 2 players, you can play 2 different species of fish, and the scoring mechanism is a little bit different, where your lowest playing species is the one that you're going to actually score to win. So it's this little bit of a cat and mouse yourself as well as with another player. And then at the 4-player or 3 or 4-player count, there's so much interaction going on the board that every game plays completely different.
Yeah, I think the bag building, because you never know what's going to come out, definitely helps it with the variability every time you play. And also, you don't really have a definitive time as when the clock is going to change, because there's a card that comes out basically says, okay, game's going to be over once this thing comes out in X amount of turns. You have a general idea when it's going to come, but you don't know exactly. So you're playing out for a certain amount of turns, but it can get rushed, it can get slowed down. You can kind of manipulate that a little bit depending on how people are playing at the table. So it's a variable game depending on who you're playing against and what comes out as well. Number 33 is Vinhos. In our last video we talked about Snowdonia and the weather component, and I think that's a big thing of Vinhos. In Vinhos, you're going to be making wine, trying to sell it, trying to impress judges that will be having different tastes for wines every year. But what your crops are going to look like are dictated by a weather tile. So that's going to change up what you're doing from a production standpoint on certain turns. And you're also going to be trying to figure out, okay, what are the judges going to like this game to next? You are kind of generally going to be doing the same thing in terms of some of your production, but you have to change that around based on the weather, based on what the judges want.
And the one cool thing is, depending on how many players you have, you are going to use different regions. So the regions that are available in one game may not be available in another game, and the different regions give little powers. Coming in at 32 is Frostpunk. Like we had in our previous video, IS Vanguard, this is kind of similar in the fact that you're following a storyline. There are different scenarios that are coming out, which is going to change the game board, but there's just so much game in this box. The variation of the way the different tiles come out, how you can buy different things, the resource management aspect of it. There's just so many different pieces the person you're playing with can all shape and change every game.
Yeah, it's a unique game to me in that it's marketed, I think, as like a 1 to 4 player game. It's really pretty much a solo game. Even if you have 4 players where you're all kind of agreeing on what you're going to do, it doesn't change that much. You're moving around different meeples. You're constantly putting out fires, and you're having to make like these really terrible decisions. Like, I have this starving child. Do I use a resource to like feed the child, give it a school, give it a warm bed, or send them out in the cold, or like
Child labor?
And then depending on what your decision is, you have to usually come back and say, okay, I have to have enough food to feed the children. And if you don't meet that criteria, very bad things happen. And like, there's a lot of decisions in this game. Number 31 is Tapestry. I think that a lot of the replayability from Tapestry comes from the different civilizations. If you have a different civilization, it's going to play differently. And I don't know how many come in the core box. I feel like there's a dozen, sorry, 16. So a bunch of technology cards as you're going to be moving along as well. I find that there's an area control aspect to this game. I find the area control stays pretty similar, but how cards come out and how the civilizations work, I think really changes up how you're going to try to attack what you're doing.
There's also the race element, so depending on how other players are moving up certain tracks, if you want a certain building or you want a certain bonus, you might decide to change your game to race against them. So that can change up your game as well.
Yeah, and there's a couple expansions. It's kind of like all the Stonemaier games or the Days of Wonders games. You know you're always going to get support after you've bought that core box. So if you want to keep adding on a different civilizations and different kind of rule sets to this or Wingspan or other games like this, you can constantly kind of just evolve what this looks like.
If you've enjoyed this list and you want to watch all the way to number 1, make sure to hit the subscribe button.